1878 to 1883. Bismarck assumes capital. Inaugurated by the railroad's final completion, the years spanning 1878-1883 were decisive in securing Bismarck-Mandan as a regional center for government, healthcare, and commerce. Those years witnessed the birth of Mandan, the acceleration of freight hauling, the establishment of Dakota Territory's first hospital, and Bismarck's assumption as capital. 1878, Benedictine sisters arrive, found St. Mary's School. In 1878, 4 or 5 sisters from St. Joseph, Minnesota arrived in Bismarck to establish St. Mary's Academy and boarding school. The school housed 21 boarders and 80 students in 3 classrooms. It is the precursor to today's St. Mary's Central High School and the University of Mary. The Benedictine sisters will later establish St. Alexius, the first hospital in Dakota Territory. Logan Grocery. Austin Logan established Logan's Grocery that year. With only $200 in his pocket, Logan had arrived in Bismarck from Connecticut a year earlier, at the age of 21. Logan built a new store on the same site in 1881. Logan's son, Roy, bought the business from his father in 1915 and constructed the present-day Logan Building in 1917, where it remained until closing in 1941. 1879, Mandan founded, Railroad Construction Resumes. Roughly 5 years after the Panic of 1873 forced railroad construction to cease, efforts were well underway to recruit around 500 men for grading the westward line and constructing a bridge to span the Missouri. General laborers were paid $1.25 to $1.50 per day and bridge contractors starting around $3 per day. In February 1879, General Rosser employed about 50 men to lay down temporary railroad track across nature's ice bridge, the Frozen River. Its purpose was to transport railroad construction material to the river's west side. By the time of its discontinuation on March 11, 538 carloads had been transported across the river. 4 days later, this ingenious engineering achievement was depicted in the prominent national publication Harper's Weekly. A few months before, Northern Pacific established a work camp on the west side of the Missouri River. By December 1878, this work campsite was chosen as the new county seat for Morton County and christened Mandan, named for the Native American tribe who once occupied the land. Several other names were considered, including simply Morton. Evidently, the local postmaster even attempted to name the town after himself. Prior to Mandan, Morton's county seat was Lincoln Township, a civilian camp located just north of Fort Abraham Lincoln. Within its first year, Mandan's population stood at 230, nearly all railroad workers. The population quickly grew to about 1,500 by 1883 and added another 1,000 by 1886. The railroad's extension across the Missouri River and a separate bridge spanning the Heart River fueled interest in Mandan. Prevalent freighting was Mandan's chief commodity during these early years, and Northern Pacific invested heavily in favoring it there. P.J. Callahan's Mandan House was likely the first business within city limits, a 24x 56-foot motel and restaurant for rail workers. The first framed building erected in present-day Mandan was a 2-story office for the chief engineer. Lots were first put up for sale and legally transferable in March 1879, by which time 150 lots were already reserved and permits for 40 buildings approved. Pat Burns' restaurant may have been the first private building permit. In April, the official plat was filed and a townsite organization established. Edmund Hackett, Bismarck's first appointed mayor, was elected president of this association, a close equivalency to mayor. That same month saw the first baby born in Mandan, to Mr. and Mrs. Milan Harmon. The Mandan Criterion, the city's first newspaper, published its first edition on May 24. It remained Morton County's official newspaper until the Mandan Pioneer was selected for this honor in January 1882, 3 months after its first edition. The Mandan Pioneer started as a weekly paper, becoming a daily circulation by the following year. The Mandan Pioneer still operates to this day. The former county courthouse at Lincoln Township was repurposed into a school, housing about a dozen students. The first classes held inside Mandan itself was at its city hall. It bounced to different locations until the first permanent schoolhouse was completed in 1882 on the southeast corner of 2nd Street Northeast and Wright Avenue, today's 1st Avenue Northeast, cost about $4,000. The public school district became formally organized in April 1881. The student population was about 60 in the subsequent school year. First National Bank of Bismarck. First National Bank of Bismarck became established in 1879 when its founding members signed articles of incorporation at the Merchants Bank building. Some sources state that it was the second bank in Bismarck. This is somewhat misleading, however, as there were prior banking operations such as the one established by W. B. Shaw from his retail store. Dr. Henry Porter, Asa Fisher, Walter Mann, George Fairchild, and Daniel Eisenberg were elected directors. Other prominent stakeholders at the time included John McLean, John Yegan, Mrs. W. B. Shaw, and the infamous Elizabeth McClellan, known by most as Little Casino. The first National Bank building constructed in 1883 will be Bismarck's largest private building until it was destroyed in the 1898 fire. A smaller replacement bank was built on the same site. Today, what was First National Bank is part of U.S. Bank. It should not be confused with First National Bank of Mandan, which became established in 1881 and is now part of Wells Fargo Bank. 1880, Grand Pacific Hotel. By 1880, Bismarck's population was nearing 2,000 and it had established a strong foundation to support a prosperous city. At the start of the decade, local Protestants established Fairview Cemetery. Louis Peterson opened the Pacific Hotel in July 1880. Following his suicide in 1889, ownership of the hotel passed on to Henry Tatley, who married the widowed Peterson in 1892. Peterson's son, John, later became a clerk at the hotel under Tatley and quickly worked his way up into management. The hotel was relocated across the street into a new framed building in November 1897. The Grand Pacific Hotel opened in 1907 immediately south of the Pacific Hotel on the northeast corner of Broadway Avenue and 4th Street. The original Pacific Hotel was replaced in 1912 with a 4-story brick annex that was molded into the 1907 Grand Pacific Hotel building. Fire badly damaged the hotel in 1915 and again in 1954, each time forcing major renovations. It closed in 1974 and was demolished as part of urban renewal. Northwestern Bank, later Norwest, now Wells Fargo, constructed a 7-story bank office building and accompanying parking ramp in its place. In 2017, that building was renamed Grand Pacific Center in honor of the hotel's legacy. 1881, railroad bridge construction commences. By 1881, track was laid to about 5 miles west of the Missouri River, almost to the Heart River. The contract was let in January to complete the multi-million-dollar Great Iron Bridge spanning the Missouri River. It finally dedicated in October 1882, nearly 10 years after the railroad first reached Bismarck. While the ceremonial Golden Spike took place the month prior, in western Montana, the bridge effectively completed the line. The original granite piers, quarried at Sauk Rapids, Minnesota, still support the structure today, but the spans and deck were replaced in 1905 to handle heavier loads. There has been recent consideration by BNSF Railway to replace the bridge, either dismantling it or, as many hope, repurposing it into a pedestrian bridge to retain this historic landmark. As the bridge's inevitable completion improved access across the river, 1881 would be a momentous year for Mandan. Both its first bank and drugstore became established that year. Northern Pacific dedicated Mandan's first permanent train depot the following year, in 1882. The beautiful 2-story depot served dutifully for decades until being replaced in 1930. First National Bank of Mandan. First National Bank of Mandan became established in 1881, electing C. Edgar Hawk president, James Bellows vice president, and Rodney Lyons cashier. It was the first bank established west of the Missouri River in Dakota Territory and would remain Mandan's only bank for many years. A wooden building was erected by the end of that year near the northwest corner of Front Street and Stark Avenue, today Main Street and Collins Avenue. A two-story brick building replaced it in 1906. That building was expanded in 1911 and 1927, and remodeled with a Greek Revival style in 1948. In August 1962, construction commenced on a $350,000 two-story replacement bank located at 111 2nd Avenue Northwest, formerly home to Raymond Ford Mercury. It opened in September 1963. A major expansion completed in January 1979 that added 8,000 square feet. First National Bank of Mandan first affiliated with Minnesota-based Northwest Bank Corporation, today's Wells Fargo, in 1930 and became First Northwestern National Bank of Mandan in 1974, then Norwest Bank in 1983. Wells Fargo still occupies the 1963-built location. The 1906-built building remains today, mostly housing professional offices, as well as Cappuccino on Collins. It should not be confused with First National Bank of Bismarck, which became established in 1879 and is now part of U.S. Bank. Taylor Drug, Mandan. Taylor Drug, Mandan's first drugstore, became established inside the First National Bank of Mandan building, preceding the bank's opening by 1 month. George and Ferdinand Bingenheimer opened the drugstore with backing from D.R. Taylor, who was a Northern Pacific superintendent in charge of constructing the railroad bridge. By 1883, Taylor Drug relocated from the bank building into People's Hotel. Taylor eventually bought out the Bingenheimer brothers and operated it until his death in 1924. Longtime pharmacist Albert E. Krejci acquired Taylor Drug and operated it until his death in 1951. Clifffield then acquired the drugstore. Taylor Drug closed in 1990. That same year, Thrifty White Drug acquired the firm's assets. Mike Kraft then established Butcher Block Meats inside the former Taylor Drug location on Main Street. 1882, Bismarck National Bank establishes. Bismarck National Bank became established on March 13, 1882. Notable stockholders at the time of founding included John Weatherby, Alexander Mackenzie, William Harmon, and J.W. Raymond, also its president. George Flannery was later installed as bank president. Construction commenced that June for its $35,000 building, known as the Raymond Block, on the northwest corner of 3rd Street and Main Avenue. It was the city's largest private building upon completion and one of the few to escape the 1898 fire. The bank operates today as BNC National Bank, rebranded in 1995 upon acquiring Metropolitan Federal Bank from Minneapolis-based First Bank System Inc. People's Hotel. George Peoples commenced construction of his namesake hotel on the northeast corner of Main Street and Stark Avenue, today's Collins Avenue, in 1882. The brick three-story structure cost a little more than $23,000 to build. Sources vary on if it opened that same year, or in 1883. Pat McGinley later acquired the hotel and renamed it the McGinley. It sold again in 1908 and it was during this ownership that it became known as Hotel Mandan. The Romers purchased it in 1916 and held ownership until at least the late 1920s. It ceased operating as a hotel in 1968. The building was demolished in April 2007. 1883, Bismarck assumes capital. In March 1883, the territorial legislature narrowly passed the Capital Commission bill that demoted Yankton as capital of Dakota Territory and established requirements for selecting a new capital. The primary justification was to centralize the capital as opposed to Yankton's distant location at the southeast corner of the territory. Governor Ordway signed the bill, known as House File No. 217, on March 8. Becoming capital instantly rocketed Bismarck's worth and ignited a development boom. Despite its seemingly obvious choice as capital, Bismarck was not initially favored among the dozen or so prospects, and Yankton would not willingly cede the capital without a fight. Commissioners. The bill defined a 9-man commission tasked with selecting a new capital, setting a July 1 deadline. It proclaimed that the commissioners be paid $6 per day for their work and that each enter into bonds totaling $40,000. Two of these commissioners ultimately become among Bismarck's most notable historical figures. One was Alexander Mackenzie, a Northern Pacific agent and lawman from Bismarck who later becomes a powerful political boss. Another, the committee chairman, was General Alexander Hughes of Elk Point, who later establishes Hughes Electric with his son in Bismarck and becomes a principal real estate investor here. Requirements. The commission bill required that the chosen city donate or guarantee $100,000 and 160 acres of land to house a capital for the seat of government. Another requirement was that the site be central and accessible from all portions of the territory. Commissioners considered both the current and future boundaries, given that there was contemplation that the territory would be split at the 46th parallel to form two states. Ultimately, it was the 49th parallel. Selecting the capital. At least 9 cities were under legitimate consideration to be the new capital. Huron, Mitchell, Pierre, Ordway, Frankfurt, and Steele were first to submit bids, followed by Bismarck, Aberdeen, Redfield, and a handful of others. With the bulk of the population centered in the southern half of Dakota Territory, it was anticipated that the capital would remain there. In particular, Huron and Redfield were thought to be early front-runners. Statistically, Bismarck was a logical choice. Its location was roughly 40 miles from the territory's geographic center and would have remained within 50 miles after the foreseeable boundary split. It was also positioned at the crossroad of the Northern Transcontinental Railroad and Missouri River, the highways of the era. Furthermore, the Northern Pacific Railway, and all its clout, favored Bismarck as capital. In reality, Bismarck was perceived to be on the border of civilization and some viewed the area west as barren waste. By his own admission in an interview with the St. Paul Dispatch, Chairman Hughes's perception improved after traveling the region during the vetting process. As an underdog, Bismarck presented a competitive bid that far exceeded the minimum requirements, 320 acres, along with the monetary stipulation. Half of those acres would be sold and guaranteed by private citizens for $300,000, bringing Bismarck's total offer to $400,000 and 160 acres of land. Northern Pacific would donate the land while private citizens would contribute the remaining funds. The commissioners visited each city under consideration before convening in Fargo in May to make the final determination. There, in a last-ditch effort, a group of Fargo citizens demanded to persuade Fargo as a contender. After a short hearing, the request was denied. Fargo did not meet the bill's stipulation requiring the capital to be centrally located. The first ballots were cast on June 1. Only one commissioner initially voted for Bismarck. Alexander Mackenzie, Burleigh County Sheriff and an agent for Northern Pacific. Interestingly, Mackenzie himself voted against Bismarck in the second ballot round, opting instead for nearby Steele. After 13 votes over 2 days, Bismarck won the majority on June 2. Mackenzie is credited with negotiating to procure enough votes. In the end, Hughes cast the tie-breaking vote after previously supporting Mitchell and Redfield. Despite the agreeable collaboration between Mackenzie and Hughes, the two men later become fierce opponents. Upon approval by the governor, Yankton was immediately stripped of its position. Territorial offices were established in a temporary capital in Bismarck until a permanent structure could be built. The cornerstone for a new Capitol building was laid on September 5. Numerous dignitaries attended, including Sitting Bull and former President Ulysses S. Grant. First occupancy occurred at the end of 1884, just in time for the 1885 Legislative Assembly. The building serves as capital, later for North Dakota when the territory is split, until consumed by fire in 1930. Legal challenge. Yankton would not surrender the capital easily and challenged the constitutionality of its relocation. Allegedly, only the legislature and governor could assign a capital, not a commission. District Chief Justice Edgerton, a Yankton local, agreed. He granted a restraining order against the commissioners, declared that its officers were appointed illegally, and removed them from office. The legal matter was appealed to the Territorial Supreme Court, who overruled Judge Edgerton's decision, but not until September 1884, when construction was already nearly complete on the Capitol. Nevertheless, Bismarck was legally victorious in procuring the capital. Failed statehood attempt. Along with Bismarck's capital assumption, there was a major push towards statehood in 1883. Although statehood was strongly approved by the public, U.S. Congress rejected the application due to poor voter turnout. It would not be until 1889 that North and South Dakota entered statehood. First National Bank, Dakota Block, and other big projects. Two buildings that would hold the standing as Bismarck's biggest private buildings for many years were constructed in 1883. The largest was First National Bank on the northwest corner of Main Avenue and 4th Street for $65,000. It was the city's largest private building until destroyed in the 1898 fire. A two-story replacement was rebuilt on the site. The bank is now owned by U.S. Bank. The second biggest was the Dakota Block, also known as the Flannery Block. The Gothic-style building was completed that October on the northeast corner of 2nd Street and Main Avenue. The building was first announced in November 1882 and completed in 1883 for about $34,000. It was a joint venture by Dr. Porter, and Messrs. Goff and Thompson. The three-story structure originally comprised of three 25-foot frontage bays, but the easternmost section has since been demolished and a new building, formerly housing Jacobson Music and Wiley Music, was erected in its place. Today, the former Dakota Block is Bismarck's third oldest surviving building. In 1999, the City Commission authorized $46,000 in tax increment financing, TIF, for its renovation. The project concluded in 2002. Other significant construction projects that year were the Territorial Prison for $50,000, the North Ward School for $30,000, and the Merchants National Bank for $27,000. Record River Crest. To this day, 1883 holds the record for the highest crest of the Missouri River, 31.6 feet. By comparison, 1952 crested at 27.9 feet and 2011 at 19.25 feet. Flood stage is 16 feet. Reportedly, flooding of 1881 was worse even though the river's crest was lower. Theodore Roosevelt. Future President Theodore Roosevelt first came to Dakota Territory in 1883 to hunt bison. He instantly fell in love with the region, particularly the Badlands around Medora. Roosevelt sought sanctuary in the Badlands the following year when both his wife and mother died on the same day, Valentine's Day. By that year, Roosevelt owned two ranches near Medora, Maltese Cross Ranch and Elkhorn Ranch, but he abandoned the ventures after the brutal winter of 1886-1887. A prominent figure even before his rise in national politics, Roosevelt's affluential background was well known, and local newspaper articles of the era poked fun at his playing cowboy in Dakota Territory and described his appearance to that of a dude. It is important to note that the meaning of dude was different then than it is now, usually intended as insulting slang for a city slicker wanting to experience the cowboy life. With plans to enter statehood on the horizon, some speculated at the time that Roosevelt took up residence here for political motivations to represent the resulting state in Washington. His time here further roused his love of nature. It also toughened him and created the legendary historical figure remembered today. Roosevelt was once quoted in a Bismarck Tribune article saying he preferred the serenity of the Badlands to trying to reform the politics of wicked Gotham. Roosevelt's legacy is clearly felt in western North Dakota. His Maltese Cross cabin later stood on the eastern grounds of the North Dakota Capitol until 1959, when it was restored and relocated to Theodore Roosevelt National Park in his beloved Badlands. His namesake park is the only national park in North Dakota and there have been recent efforts to locate his presidential library there. Two Bismarck schools have been named in his honor, in 1924 and 1975.
Created by Governor William Guy, the Theodore Roosevelt